Thank you. I'll pass it over to my colleague,
MPP Graywell.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, wanted to thank the Minister for this great commitment he's shown in investing in research and innovation, and I also wanted to congratulate him on his new role as our Minister of Colleges and Universities. We know you're going to do an amazing job. But one thing that concerns me is theft of intellectual property, whether that be the way of cyber attacks, espionage. And I wanted to ask you about what we're doing to safeguard our publicly funded research. That's just not about protecting our intellectual property, but also about ensuring that our taxpayer dollars go to benefiting Ontarians in our economy. What's the ministry going to do to strengthen our intellectual property protection and ensure taxpayer dollars don't go to waste, and all the innovation that we're doing in various universities across the province, let's say in our tech sector capital in Waterloo or Kitchener, and all of the great new ideas that we're developing, the technology that we're developing? What are we doing to protect all of that? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I'm just getting some refills on water. As a ministry, I'm proud to say that we've taken concrete action to both protect and commercialize our province's intellectual property, or IP, developed through our publicly funded research. As I mentioned earlier, our government is making major ongoing investments in research each year through its 3 competitive research programs and its investments in leading research institutes. In 23-24 alone, these investments totaled over $270 million and included research projects at most of Ontario's publicly assisted post-secondary institutions, as well as research institutes and academic hospitals across the whole province. These research projects span a number of fields and are a key source of innovation and commercialization in our province. They also help make our research sector one of the leading contributors to Ontario's global competitiveness and productivity. Research security and IP protection go hand in hand, and it's the reason why our government has made both a priority. Given how we invest in research, we must ensure those taxpayer dollars are spent in a way that directly benefits Ontarians and the whole economy. That's why the ministry has made a number of strategic investments and enhancements over the past few years to protect the national and provincial security of our world-class research ecosystem and to strengthen IP protection for Ontario researchers, entrepreneurs, and businesses. I want to be clear, this ministry takes research security very seriously, because without the proper protections, the discoveries and innovations made by Ontario's researchers are under threat within an increasingly complex globalized research community. Cyber attacks, espionage, and theft of financial and research data can prove to be very costly, dangerous, and disruptive to research projects. That's why research security is a shared responsibility. Researchers, their institutions, and the provincial and federal government all have a role to play in ensuring that our publicly funded research is adequately protected. While post-secondary institutions using federal government resources establish their own protocols and frameworks to avoid cyber attacks and other threats, the ministry is also doing its part through its research security framework that was initially implemented in 2019 and which has been further enhanced this year. For example, when a researcher applies for funding through one of the ministry's 3 competitive research programs, such as the Ontario Research Fund or Early Researcher Awards, they need to meet certain requirements that are designed to protect the research and safeguard it from foreign interference. This includes the requirements to follow the ministry's new research security guidelines, submit an application attestation form, and complete a checklist on mitigating economic and geopolitical risk. If a researcher's application is accepted and the ministry decides to award them research funding, we also have additional requirements in place, such as a cyber and information security plan and an ongoing requirement to assess and manage any potential economic or geopolitical risk to actively mitigate risk and protect data. And if the ministry determines that a research project is high risk, the institution needs to take part in an extra risk mitigation process. Once a transfer payment agreement is in place, the ministry's work doesn't end there, as ministry staff will also conduct spot audits to confirm if the funding recipient is upholding certain risk reduction and mitigation measures. In addition, there's also a new annual requirement for institutions to disclose if they have any active research agreements with any foreign entities. Based on these examples,
Minister,
I think it's clear
one minute remaining in this round.
that the ministry takes safeguarding our publicly funded research very seriously. Thanks to our enhanced security framework, we're ensuring that Ontario's research, for which we provide significant funding support, stays safe from a variety of thefts, both domestically and internationally.
In this regard, I'd like to talk about how our government is working to strengthen IP protection for Ontario's researchers, entrepreneurs, and businesses. But first, I'd like to speak about some of Ontario's IP challenges. According to data from the Association of University Technology Managers between 2010 and 2019, Ontario consistently ranked among the top 10 jurisdictions in the world when it came to research spending and total innovation disclosures. However, despite these strengths, statistics showed that Ontario and Canada were still behind many of its peer jurisdictions when it came to protecting IP and generating economic returns from IP licensing and commercialization activities.
Thank you, Minister. That concludes this round. We'll now go back to the official opposition. MPP Fife.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all the staff that are here and to the Minister. I listened to your opening comments around the importance of research, and you'll know that I'm the MPP for Waterloo. We have the University of Waterloo, we have Wilfrid Laurier, we have Conestoga. Education is a core value of our community, and research is a major economic driver for our community, and we kind of regard ourselves as the Silicon Valley of the North. The commercialization of that research has been profound in the past. I will tell you, Minister, though, that we are seeing research stalled because of a lack of leadership from your government and a lack of funding. And I do want to say that research and development is key to our success. When a university and a college has a strong, well-supported, well-funded research program, it draws excellent teachers, excellent professors, it draws students, it draws investment from the private sector and for collaboration. And when I look at the estimates for this sector, I'm looking at vote item 3005, page 25 shows a $30 million cut from research programming. There is a $5 million cut from research program capital expenses. And on page 44, the ministry says a thriving research sector is a central pillar of the province's innovation system, but we do see a breakdown of those cuts on page 103, including 45.2% cuts to wages, which is in this environment, in this climate, is fairly unconscionable. 53% cuts to employee benefits, 83% cuts to transportation, services, supplies, and equipment. So you can see that I see, and I know that the universities and colleges are feeling this in real time, that there's a disconnect between the words that you say about how research matters to your government and what's happening on the ground. So I want to give you an opportunity to, explain how you can talk about how important research is, but when it comes down to the funding, you are failing in that regard.
So before I pass it over to Deputy Wade to provide some of the context on the ministry reorganization, I'd just like to clarify and repeat, since 2018, Ontario's invested over $740 million in 1,300
Chair, and we're not
projects.
playing that game here today. I'm sorry. Asking you a specific question. This is my time. I'm not here to hear you repeat the same things over again or to read your notes. This really matters to the sector. So I'm asking you, Minister, to answer the question that I just posed to you.
I think if you'd allow me the time to actually
I'm
answer
not
the
interested
question.
in 2018.
Since 2018, there's been
interested in 2024.
$740 million invested, which have provided over 120,000 training opportunities for researchers and students across the province.
Chair, I asked a question about the cuts, right? I just want to ask, I'm asking you a genuine question. This is estimates. This tells the real priorities of the government. Why do you talk about research being so important to the sector when you have a $30 million cut on vote item 3005?
You've implied 3 times that you wanted to talk about the real-life experiences, and that's why I was bringing up our investments since 2018. They're pretty significant, almost $1 billion with 120,000 training opportunities.
I think $30
But I will
million
pass it over to Deputy Wade to provide further context.
I want you, as the minister, to explain why there's a $30 million cut. That's a real cut, okay? And I'm not implying that there's a disconnect. I'm stating it very clearly. There's a disconnect between the words that you're saying about the importance of research and innovation and then the actual dollars that are going towards that sector. And I would like for you to answer the question, Minister.
So as I mentioned, there was a recent ministry reorganization. Files were shifted to other areas affecting the overall research operating line budget. But as I am only 7 weeks into this job, I'll pass it over to Deputy Way, who understands some of those details in finer detail, because I don't want to necessarily lead you down the wrong path with some of the numbers.
David Way, Deputy Minister. So as the Minister stated, there were a few different things that came into play with the reduction, and can ask ADM Jeff Butler to elaborate further. But I would say there were, as with any of these research projects, they are very long-term in nature, typically five plus years, and there are puts and takes as to how that research project happened. As a result, we move funds around from year to year depending on the situation with those individual projects. There were also delays as it related to COVID through the years. It's how quickly research projects could happen. And so that was also a further delay, as well as some of the reorganization issues that the Minister had indicated.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. So you have explained that there's some reorganization, there's some adjustments. Certainly Bill 124 created a lot of chaos around compensation. We all know that that was an unconstitutional piece of legislation which really did a lot of damage in Ontario. And also you've indicated that some of these cuts are at the ministry level. Is that correct?
So I didn't say there were cuts. What I'm saying is there were movement between different vote items in this case, and different projects between different years.
So, but to the total of $30 million.
The impact, as you said, in estimates is this year. I can ask my
Okay,
ADM
no,
Jeff Butler
no,
to
that's
elaborate
okay.
further and provide more understanding about how they have moved between the years. If
No, that's
helpful.
okay. I do want to get down to, I mean, because for me as the finance critic, it is about following the money. And I'm sure that the ministry resources are important, part of the system. Of course they are. And so that in itself for me is concerning. But I do see also a 10% cut to transfers for research operating costs as well. Can you speak to that, or can the minister speak to the 10% reduction in research operating costs?
I'll pass it to the Deputy to provide context on that.
Thanks, Minister. So I will ask ADM Jeff Butler to provide further color.
Thank you. Oh, are you okay? Are you okay?
Jeff Butler, ADM Operations, and I'm fine, thank you.
Still Jeff Butler, too.
So thank you for the question. So with respect to the overall vote item, as the deputy noted, if you look at the $30 million, with respect to the direct operating expenses related to that vote item, that's salary and wages, employee benefits, and other services and transportation. A portion of ministry staff that were accounted for in that vote item because of ministry restructuring are now accounted for in the post-secondary education vote item. So there haven't been, that's a change to where those salaries and wages are accounted for between 2023-24 and 24-25. Similarly, the Intellectual Property Ontario transfer payment amount, which in 23-24 was about $7.6 million, is now, in 24-25 I believe is about $13 million, is now accounted for in the post-secondary education vote item rather than the research programs vote item.
Was 7.8? Was it 7.8 million you just said?
It was 7.6.
7.6. Thank you.
Yeah, 7.68. Which is now accounted for in the post-secondary education's vote item. The balance of the $30 million difference, about $18 million, is changes in sort of planned expenditures for programs. As the deputy noted, research is a long-term enterprise. Most of the projects that we fund can be 5 to 7 years in duration. And over the course of a project, expenditures may roll out differently than we had initially planned. And so we did see significant delays during COVID in timing of procurement and timing of research expenditures that are still sort of working their way out.
Okay, so thank you for that. So I will note, I did know that you were going to mention the adjustments piece, but I also see that the ministry underspent on transfers for research by $15 million last year. So I'd like to know why that happened. I mean, I'm a former university researcher, so I do know that there's ebbs and flows. But if there's $15 million that could potentially be invested, I know that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of applications from universities coming into the government to try to actually, strengthen the research core at those sectors. So can you address the $15 million in the last year that was not transferred?
Yeah, so the estimates are, sorry, I'll state my name again, Jeff Butler, ADM Operations Division.
Still, yeah. Okay.
And still okay. So the estimates are our forecast for the year of what we think we're going to be spending on research programs. Throughout the course of the year, things can evolve differently than we had anticipated at the beginning of the year. Many of our programs are co-funded programs with the federal government. They have to go through federal government adjudication, and the timing of when the federal government makes its award decisions may end up different than we had planned on. And again, as I noted, throughout the year, projects may face delays and need a reprofiling of their expenditures across years. So where changes in the transfer payment operating expense over the course of the year may be influenced by those things, and that's what's sort of happened.
So that is good to hear. I will tell you, though, that what I'm hearing from the sector is that when there are inconsistent investments and a lack of clarity around research dollars, that has a cooling effect on research applications. People don't necessarily want to go through the effort of soliciting and submitting applications. So I do, and obviously estimates are forward-thinking, so I want to make sure that the minister, new 7 week into the role, understands that when there are inconsistencies in how the funding flows, it has a cooling impact on the sector as a whole. But I do thank you for those answers. I'm going to move forward now I'm going to pick up where my colleagues started on the OSAP, because I do note that the DM and the ADM also talked about OSAP as an entitlement program. And I guess where some of us are more entitled to our entitlements than others. The fact of the matter is though, when the Ontario government did cut OSAP by $400 million, the federal government actually picked up the slack on that, but students themselves actually didn't get any further ahead. And so the clawback from the province meant that students who were struggling felt no impact of the increased federal contribution to OSAP. And I will note to the minister who said, that you're proud of the 400,000 plus who actually was able to access OSAP, but there was 11,454 students who did not qualify, and this is and then this leads to how we are funding post-secondary institutions and colleges. And I was encouraged to hear the deputy minister say that a funding review will be forthcoming, because the sector desperately wants a new funding formula for the post-secondary sector. So I wanted to get some clarity on the framework of that review, the timing of that review, and who's going to be involved. Because, the Blue Ribbon panel was your panel, it was your report, and at the end of the day, you didn't listen to those experts. And I don't want us to go through the same exercise again. So I'm looking for some assurances from the new minister and the deputy minister and the assistant deputy minister about this process.
So I know you mentioned the 400,000 students. I would like to bring that up. I am very proud of that. Obviously, understanding that all students are going to be able to qualify for OSAP. That's why in 2018, 2019, we decreased tuition by 10%. Understanding that we had the highest tuition in Canada. We are now the fourth highest tuition in Canada. But our government is taking a whole-of-government approach to ensure that the students' affordability is top of mind. But I'll pass it to Deputy Way to provide more detail.
David Way, Deputy Minister. I apologize, Chair. I just didn't quite understand the questions about the funding. When we were talking about the funding formula, that was in particular for institutions, so colleges, universities, not particularly about OSAP.
No. I connected OSAP. I'm looking at the barriers to universities and colleges. having access to a grant program or not is a barrier. And then also, obviously, and I'm glad that the minister pointed this out, Ontario has the highest levels of tuition in the country. So that's a barrier. So when you mentioned, to answer my colleague's question, around reviewing the operational funding for post-secondary institutions, I was interested in hearing more about that.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you for the clarification, Chair. So David Way, Deputy Minister. I would say I'll ask ADM Josh Paul to come up and talk a bit more about the discussions we're having with the institutions about the funding formula and some of the discussions we plan on having going forward. I would, to your point, the minister has said already that we were the highest, Ontario was the highest when the government started. We are now the third highest, I believe, as a result of the cut and freeze, so we're no longer the highest from a tuition perspective. Josh.
Thank you very much, Josh Paul, ADM of the Financial Sustainability Performance and Oversight Division. The short answer is that we don't yet have all of the details of the funding formula review sketched out. The government has committed to colleges and universities as part of the Strategic Mandate Agreement Round 4 process to review the funding formula, and those details will come forward in the coming months. And the review itself is not scheduled to be engaged in earnest until such time as the SMA 4 agreements are signed, which is anticipated sometime, hopefully, in the January, February, March timeframe.
Thank you for that. There is great interest, though, I'm sure that you know, from the sector to review how post-secondary institutions are funded. And so I know that there will be a lot of interest to participate. I hope that it's a public process, and I hope that it's a transparent process. And my colleague actually just pointed out that Ontario, though, has the lowest investment per student funding in the country. And so that is why I'm just connecting it to this call for review. It is worth noting that universities receiving the lowest per student government funding in Canada, with Ontario receiving $8,647, while the Canadian average was $12,215 in 2020-2021. Provincial operating funding per student has declined in real terms since 2006-07 and currently represents about 30% of total university operating revenue. I will share a story with you. When we were doing finance review for the last budget, we were down in Oakville at the Holiday Inn, and Steve Orsini, who's president, obviously, of the Ontario Universities, was presenting to us. And at the beginning of his comments, there was a small leak in the ceiling. And then the leak began to grow and grow, and we all sort of tried to ignore it, except for our, the tech staff, because everything was getting wet. And just as he started to talk about the capital funding deficit in the sector, the ceiling in the Holiday Inn literally collapsed. It was very interesting timing. It was a very interesting metaphor. So this is one of the areas where colleges and universities are really anxious to see something new on the table around capital investment. One fellow from University of Waterloo came to visit me here at Queen's Park on a lobby day and noticed that there has been a bucket in a hallway in the university for 8 years. And they finally just put a sign up that said, "This is where the bucket goes." And we can agree that this is not sustainable, right? And that our institutions in and of themselves need to be funded in such a way that it reflects the good work that is happening and the potential of those institutions. I just want to move over to Colleges Ontario right now, and Minister, Colleges Ontario has stated that they are projected to see a decline of at least $1.7 billion in revenue due to the restrictions that have been placed around international students. And I want us to have an honest conversation about how we got here. Colleges and universities have been underfunded systemically for years now. The fees for international students are not regulated and can be quite high. I think universities and colleges looked at a way to generate some revenue to fill the gap of provincial funding. And Ontario's investments in public college students, as I've said, is already the lowest in Canada. So as the new minister and as you engage on this file, because it's a complicated file with international students.
MP5, you've got 1 minute left.
I was just wondering, what is your vision for how we will be, making up for that lost revenue in real terms so that we don't fall further behind in the sector?
Thank you. So I will go back to our $1.3 billion investment, the $903 million, $700 of that is across the board over the next 3 years, as well as the $203 million for top-ups for institutions that have a greater financial need, and that will be included in that $203 million. But I'll pass it to the Deputy for any further context.
I would just like to say, sorry, Deputy Minister, the sector has already told you in many ways, in writing, in person, through media releases, that that is not going to suffice. So there needs to be a vision for how we're going to be funding. I noticed you called them publicly assisted universities. This is a fact, and we'll get that in our next section.
Yeah, we're out of time for this round. MPP Clancy, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. I might piggyback on the line of conversation that just happened. I do have concerns about how much our institutions have had to rely on international students. The stat I saw was that students from India paid more to support our colleges and universities than our government. What's your reaction to how much the sectors had to rely on international students in order to pay the bills?
Well, being a human resource professional myself and understanding that the labor market needs are significant, we need our international students to be able to fulfill the labor gaps that are there, whether it's in health, human resources, STEM, skilled trades. Ultimately, I look towards our international students for being able to fill a gap in our careers right now, in our labor market, that ultimately we don't have enough skilled trades in our domestic students, and our international students are a solution to be able to help some of our gaps in healthcare and STEM and skilled trades. But I'll pass it to the Deputy to provide context.
Yeah, as the Minister said, I do think the international students play a really important role in the system and play a really important role for the community. They're an important part of both the cultural kind of community they bring, cultural assets they bring to the community, but also to the labor market needs that are needed within each of the communities. So I think we were disappointed by the action the federal government took on international students, but I do think we continue to believe that they're an important part of our institutions going forward.
I guess my concern is that it wasn't always a good fit labor market-wise. Like in my community, we had one institution that went from 763 students to over 30,000 students. And now we're addressing the housing issue, but you can imagine as a community how the impact is. And when I go door to door, unfortunately, the story hasn't been told that we need to value and thank our international students for keeping our institutions afloat, because there's a lot of misconceptions around immigration that they're getting free things, they're getting free this, they're getting free that, rather than thanking international students for actually keeping our institutions alive. And not only that, I've talked to many international students. I have one who lives with me, and we haven't done a very good job of fitting the labor market needs with students going in. And I don't want to, obviously I can't make blanket statements. I know there are lots of ways in which we're recruiting for certain professions like healthcare, but there's a lot of other areas where we haven't done very well, to be honest, to make sure that people coming in are studying something that can lead to a meaningful job. Like my roommate, for example, took HR and project management. She's a teacher back home. We need teachers here. We didn't do a good job. It turned into a bit of a misleading pipeline between what the story was told abroad and what the partnerships are happening and what the reality is in the labor market. I guess my hope is, can I ask you, Minister, to please consider a discussion with our labor minister to kind of to ensure that the programs and the recruitment that we're doing is connected to the labor needs in our community, like childcare, for example?
Absolutely. Always having conversations with all ministers. We take a whole government approach on understanding the labor market needs right across all sectors in that regard.
And so one point I'll ask that you talk to him, like, we lose people. So in Conestoga College, for example, students get trained as childcare providers, but because we don't provide proper immigration points, they leave to go to other provinces where they have a better chance of becoming permanent residents. So we train them here, and then they leave the province. And this happens in other categories as well. My hope is, too, that we can recognize the impact when it comes to housing. I know colleges in the past weren't funded for housing, but because of budget shortfalls, I know you've cut the red tape for housing, but I think we need better than that. We need a lot more housing, 30,000, right? That's a lot of people who need a place to live. Can you speak to the investments you can make to ensure that that people have a place to live?
Absolutely. As I'm sure you're well aware, that publicly assisted colleges and universities are responsible for their student housing. The ministry does not fund housing projects. But, my first week on the job, I don't even know if it was a week, I was at Humber College, Lakeshore. They brought on 336 new spaces of residence spaces. Since 2020, there's almost been 3,000 new units across the province being developed. At 1,448 of those being at our publicly assisted colleges. So I'd like to think that the system is, obviously there is a shortage of housing, but the system is functioning fairly properly, and that's why we're trying to get some of the red tape out of the way. And to quote, the Ontario University's 23 report, A Plan for Prosperity, it's projected that there's over 9,000 new spaces added over the next 5 years in our university sector, as well as Colleges Ontario has stated in August of this year that there's thousands of residences at different stages of development right now. But I'll pass it to Deputy Way to provide further detail.
That's David Way, Deputy Minister. I just want to provide one comment on your previous comment on labour market needs, that is a federal responsibility, the point system. We don't really have any role to play in that. It is certainly something that the ministry has advocated for, to your point, that those have been trained in particular areas that are of labour market need, that those be reflected in how the point system worked. As it regards to student housing, absolutely, as the minister kind of indicated, we continue to work closely with colleges and have their student housing plan that we put in place, that we require all institutions to publish this housing plan for their students. And that's an important way of providing that visibility on what is available to students, and that they're making steps towards addressing some of those housing issues as well. I would comment also that we're working closely with the Ministry of Finance on the Building Ontario Fund and the potential for that to be helping to fund student housing in the future.
Okay, I would appreciate that because, again, 30,000 people into a community has a big impact when the institutions don't have the capital money sometimes to, when I go to campuses, yes, there's some new spaces, but a lot of old spaces that need refurbishment, even to renovate existing dormitories, let alone to build new beds. So I'm curious why there isn't a move to index more things to inflation. We've seen a big spike in inflation, and that's affecting hiring, recruitment, and retention of folks. It's affecting the cost of living. I know when I talked to students from Conestoga College, the cost of living was their number one concern. And so I'm just curious why we can't, or could we, perhaps index more of our per student funding, OSAP eligibility and such to inflation.
So understanding, on the tuition side, we definitely would not want to index that to inflation at this point in time. We have frozen tuition and we reduced it by 10%, but understanding that's part of our $1.3 billion investment is to ensure that the post-secondary education system is viable and financially stable. But I'll allow Deputy Way to provide further details on that.
Thank you, Minister. David Way, Deputy Minister. So as the Minister said, as part of the $903 million that we're providing, that is aligned with inflation increases that are expected over the next few years. And so the percentages that we are providing to those institutions at a minimum are related to that, to the inflation rate going forward. I would say on OSAP in particular, maybe I can ask Jeff Butler to come and talk a bit about OSAP. That is part of the considerations that we provide into how we assess student need. And so maybe I'll ask Jeff Butler to come forward and talk further about that as it relates to inflation.
Jeff Butler, Assistant Deputy Minister, Operations Division. So with respect to OSAP, there are a number of costs that are recognized in the determination of need, including living expenses. So things like housing, childcare, other living expenses that a student may have, and those components are indexed to inflation. So the amount that's recognized as part of the needs assessment does increase with inflation.
Okay.
You've got about 1 minute left, MPP Clancy, in this round.
Okay. Yeah, I guess my concern is growth. You know, I think our sector really wants to innovate, and I'm hearing that because of budget deficits, it's hard for them to do that. So how are with the per capita, I guess you're doing the review, so we'll have to wait and see, but yeah, I guess that's a big concern. And what would you say to universities who are holding back on growing and innovating because of the budget constraints?
Well, I think the numbers don't lie. Most universities are growing. In the last 5 years, full-time domestic enrollment grew by 4%. In the last 10 years, it grew by 7%.
I hope that doesn't also mean that we have big class sizes. Have you been checking in with the amount of student to professor ratios that are commensurate with that? Because we do care about quality, and I do believe, as someone who worked in the school system.
Thanks, MPP Clancy. That's all the time we have for your round. We'll now move to the government for a 20-minute round. MPP Smith.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I want to thank the Minister and his team for being here today. And I would be remiss, this is October 7th, and I wanted to talk to the Minister about the new directives that you recently issued. Obviously, with the passing of Bill 166 earlier this year, the government took major steps forward in putting in place processes for students to feel safer on campus. And I know my community greatly appreciates the leadership from our ministry and our government on this matter. So my question to you is, can you provide the committee with an update on what has transpired over the summer and how the ministry is continuing to support students and the safety of campuses as a whole?
Absolutely. Thank you, MPP Smith, for that question. Indeed, this last year has been very challenging right across all of our campuses, not only in Ontario, but across the world, as well as our communities. I spoke about it earlier with MPP Clancy, but ultimately being here at this committee and hearing the stories and the worry of those two young ladies that presented to committee, that resonated with me. I've heard the stories of many students, and they talked about that more could be done and more should be done, to be honest with you, to be frank. Any instance of hate should be properly reported and investigated, and that's something that resonated with myself, and I'm sure everyone else that was here, is that they did not believe anything happened. They didn't believe there was any repercussions. They didn't believe that it was investigated as well. So that's part of the reason why we brought forward Bill 166, is to ensure that all institutions do a better job at ensuring that any instance of hate or racism on campus is recognized, it's also recorded and reported, and there's something done about it. Some of the objectives of the directive that we sent out are obviously to promote safe, inclusive, and respectful campuses free of harassment and discrimination. We also want to improve the transparency and the consistency of the policies, as I mentioned, in response to incidents of racism and hate on post-secondary environments. We want to increase awareness of and ease of access to institutional policies and processes. That was one thing, again, that stood out with the two young ladies. They didn't know the policies. They didn't understand the processes because they weren't clearly listed. We want to ensure that complaint mechanisms are responsive, that they're also effective, and they're also safe for the complainants. We want to foster positive student experiences and thriving campus communities to support learning and optimize academic and ultimately labor market successes. That is what our universities and colleges are about, is to ensure that our labor markets are well looked after in the future. And we want to preserve integrity and public trust in Ontario's publicly assisted post-secondary institution. School policies and procedures are also required to be posted in publicly accessible platforms to ensure that everyone can stay informed. And as I mentioned, those two ladies did not know there were any policies. They weren't posted. They weren't clear. And they also should have immediate access to the supports that they may need. understanding that each individual community does have nuances and differences in them. That's why the institutions are creating their own anti-hate directives on their local campuses. We'll also note that these policies will not only apply to students, but they also apply to faculty, staff, management, and any visitors to the campus, including individuals such as guest speakers. I think it's really important to know that that directive and policy is all-encompassing on anything that happens on the campus. This decision was made with the belief that our campuses need to be places of free speech, not hate speech, not intimidation, not bullying, and not harassment. And that not being part of official part of the college or university campus shouldn't give you the ability, as I implied earlier, to be able to be held to a different standard, to come on campus and to start harassing and start hate speech on the campus. So as you mentioned, on Friday, I sent a memo out to our presidents reminding them of their obligation to keep students on our campuses safe and to keep respectful environments on the campus. While the school policies are still being developed and due by the end of January 2025 to align with the new directive, there still is no excuse for allowing anyone on our campuses to feel attacked, unsafe in any way, like those two ladies felt. I've also let the presidents know that my ministry will be following up on any instances of concern to ensure there is an appropriate response by the institution that aligns with our new directives. Regardless of them being in place, we still believe that the message of the directives is heard and we expect it to be followed. It's my view as the minister that the focus on college and university campuses should first and foremost be about giving students a world-class education that prepares them for the future. That's the standard that I set, and I expect schools to follow.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm now going to pass the rest of my time to Minister Kusindova Bashta.
Thank you, MPP Smith. Minister?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Minister, for being here. And I was in your same hot seat about a week ago, so I understand. In any case, it's music to my ears to hear about nursing education in Ontario, maybe a little bit for selfish reasons, and not only because I'm a nurse, but also because as the Minister of Long-Term Care, it's in my vested interest to ensure that we continue funding and expanding nursing education in our province. So, we did have a historical amount of enrollment in our nursing schools, both colleges and universities last year, 30,000 nursing students. So that's phenomenal, and and a historical number. And I hope to continue seeing that number growing. You mentioned in your remarks that the government is investing $128 million over the next three years to expand nursing student seats to even more registered nurses and registered practical nurses across our province. I do also want to note that it was this government that made it possible for colleges to actually offer standalone nursing baccalaureate programs. And I thought that was a step in the right direction because we have all kinds of learners in our province, and for some, going to university is their choice, and to others is college, because college is more practical and hands-on education. And frankly, we need everyone at the table, whether it's colleges or universities, we need to be graduating nurses. So can you speak a little bit more to your investments into nursing education? And maybe also to the programs at large, right? So I know we have the Learn and Stay program, which is also very helpful, especially to our people in the north, where the government funds the cost of tuition and books for nurses and other professionals. Maybe you can speak to that. And I just want to say that I wish that program, Learn and Stay, was available when I was a nursing student, because that would have certainly been something I would have been very, very interested in. So if you could just expand on those two, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Thank you for this important question. So our government recognizes and truly appreciates the important role that healthcare professionals play across this province, including yourself. So thank you. This is also something that really hits home for me as well, having worked in the healthcare shortly after I graduated for a couple years at St. Elizabeth Home Care, and as a passionate advocate for bringing convenient care close to home to our communities, as well as having aging parents, myself, and young children also. So all ends of the spectrum, I think, are very evident in my life with my parents getting into their late 70s. They keep the heart of this province, the healthcare professionals, and its people healthy. And while our government has been focused on how to improve nursing, medical education, and really post-secondary education as a whole since we took office, we've also recognized that more truly needs to be done to strengthen the supply of healthcare professionals across the province, connecting them to better care experiences closer to home. And it starts with expanding high-caliber education for those on the front lines. I'm extremely grateful for every single person working in the healthcare system across the province, and we remain committed to growing Ontario's healthcare capacity both now and for years to come. To answer your question, I want to first speak about the groundbreaking work this government is doing to expand medical education, and then touch on the many steps we're taking to build up our workforce of healthcare professionals, including doctors, nurses, paramedics, personal support workers, and other allied health professions like medical laboratory technicians as well, all of which contribute to keeping this province and its people thriving and healthy. To continue to support a strong healthcare workforce in the years ahead, Ontario's post-secondary institutions are training more doctors than ever before. Building on investments announced in the 2022 budget and the 2023 budget, our government has invested over $133 million to add another 260 undergraduate medical seats and 449 postgraduate medical training positions, a pretty significant expansion. This expansion investment was part of the government's Your Health Plan, which includes initiatives to hire more healthcare workers. And as Deputy Way mentioned earlier, these investments mark the largest expansion of medical education in over 10 years and supports every single medical school in this province. With the addition of York University's new medical school, these investments will bring the total number of undergraduate medical seats to 1,212 and postgraduate medical training positions to 1,637 by 2028. And as a direct result of these expansions, we will see more physicians ready to practice and ready to care for the people of Ontario as early as 2029. Numbers and investments aside, what does this mean? For me as a father of 3 young children, it means that when people and families like mine need access to a healthcare provider, they can find the care they need closer to home. It means that whenever a teacher like my wife Kim asks their students that age-old question, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the students respond by saying, doctor. The capacity will be there for them to follow their dreams. And I'd like to think that because of this government, those students are that much closer to turning that dream into a reality. You'll recall that Deputy Way mentioned, in addition to these expansions to medical education, our government is also supporting brand new medical schools, including Toronto's Metropolitan University's TMU School of Medicine located in Brampton, and York University's School of Medicine located in Vaughan. Last year, our government provided over $9 million to TMU to support planning activities for their new medical school. As part of the medical education expansions I mentioned earlier, TMU will begin their medical program in 25-26 with 94 undergraduate seats and 105 postgraduate seats. TMU's new School of Medicine will take a unique, community-driven, and intentionally inclusive approach to medical training and growing Ontario's supply of doctors. Set to open in 25-26, it will be located in Brampton's Bramalea Civic Centre. The site will provide 250,000 square feet of space for classrooms, offices, research facilities, and an integrated health clinic as well. The William Osler Health System, as one of TMU's clinical partners, will support the School of Medicine in providing the clinical learning environment needed for undergraduate medical education, residency training, and professional development. After the initial startup funding, we will continue to provide TMU with ongoing operational funding, as we do with all medical schools in Ontario, to support them in maintaining their medical education programs. We're also supporting York University's new School of Medicine by providing an initial investment of $9 million. This will help York University begin the design and planning for its new medical school and new 3-year compressed undergraduate medical program. Proposed to launch in September 2028, York University's new medical school is anticipated to have 80 undergraduate seats and up to 102 postgraduate positions. Once the school is operating at full capacity, it will have up to 240 undergraduate medical seats and 293 postgraduate training positions on an annual basis. Founded on a patient-centered, community-based approach, the York University School of Medicine will be the first medical school in Canada to primarily focus on training family doctors. The new medical school will be built within the Vaughan Healthcare Centre precinct and work with Mackenzie Health's Cordalucci Vaughan Hospital as its clinical partner. Our government will continue to support York University with the establishment of the new medical school and will provide operating funding once the school enrolls its first cohort in 28-29. By training more doctors in Ontario, these new medical schools will improve the province's overall primary care capacity. They will help alleviate pressures facing the healthcare system, attract and retain more doctors in Ontario, and lead to better health outcomes for communities across the province. Another step our government is taking to grow the province's healthcare capacity is to expand nursing enrollment. The ministry works closely with the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Long-Term Care to support nursing education in Ontario. Since 2021, these three ministries have worked in close partnership to launch 3 nursing enrollment expansion initiatives, adding up to 6,500 additional nursing education spaces. As we've mentioned, our government has invested an additional $128 million over 3 years to sustain 2,000 Bachelor of Science in Nursing spots and 1,000 practical nursing program spaces across Ontario. As a relatively new minister, I'm proud to be part of a post-secondary sector that truly values the nursing profession, so much so that all 24 publicly assisted colleges, as well as 14 publicly assisted universities, and 6 Indigenous institutes in Ontario offer some form of nursing education. The Ontario government has introduced new pathways for nursing degree education, including standalone Bachelor of Science in Nursing programs at both universities and the college institutions, giving students more options to pursue their education, closer to home, I might add. With continued oversight, support, and investments from this government, in this school year alone, there are 22 standalone nursing programs offered by either publicly assisted colleges or universities. There are nearly 20,000 domestic full-time students enrolled in nursing degree programs, and over 8,000 domestic full-time students enrolled in practical nursing programs in Ontario's post-secondary institutions. Medical professionals are vital in keeping people in every corner of this province healthy. And training more nurses and doctors will give people in Ontario more access to health care that they need, when they need it, wherever they may live. Over the last few years, we've seen how crucial it is to build up a strong, robust healthcare system, no more so than during the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic. During this time, we saw an array of healthcare professionals step up to care for Ontario's people and their families, especially the paramedics. To address the shortage of paramedics in Ontario, our government has been working to expand enrollment in college primary care paramedic programs. Over 3 years, starting in 23-24 school year, we're investing up to $6.2 million each school year to expand enrollment for this program. With this investment, we've supported increased enrollment in PCP programs by adding 167 students in 23-24. And this year, we have a target of over 300 additional students enrolled in PC college diploma programs, further bolstering Ontario's paramedic supply, so that paramedics and ambulances continue to be available to respond to emergencies and care for people when they need it the most. We're also working to train and recruit more personal support workers who are responsible for providing care to some of the most vulnerable people in our province and are critical to our healthcare system. That's why in 23 we announced an investment of more than $300 million over 3 years into PSW education, which builds on investments the government made between 21 and 22, including funding for 2 rounds of accelerated PSW training programs at public colleges, supporting over 12,000 students. With this investment, the province also added 2 rounds of PSW Challenge Fund at career colleges in Ontario. The PSW Challenge Fund is a grant that helps students pay for their PSW training, including tuition, books, school fees, and costs during their internship. So far, this fund has supported a total of 8,425 new PSW students. That's over 8,000 future PSWs caring for our loved ones and giving them the daily physical and social support they need and deserve. Our government is also providing up to $8.4 million in funding to expand PSW programs at 7 Indigenous institutes, funding approximately 247 students across 24-25 and 25-26. Likewise, in the 24-25 academic year, we're providing over $2 million in funding to pre-health programs at 7 Indigenous institutes as well. This will help Indigenous students transition into health-related post-secondary programs. We're also investing more than $2.5 million over 2 years to train up to 90 French-speaking long-term care staff, such as resident support personnel and dietary aides, to become PSWs through the Learn and Earn Accelerated Program, or LEAP. Lastly, I'd like to talk about Ontario's allied health expansions, yet another way this government is building up the province's healthcare capacity. Just like it takes a village to raise a child, and I can very much appreciate that because I'm away from my children all the time, it takes a village of skilled healthcare professionals to support a healthcare system as robust as ours. That's why this government has also made significant investments into allied health professions, including providing funding to 10 colleges in 24-25 to increase enrollment
You have about 1 minute left.
in key allied health programs by over 200 students. These programs include magnetic resonance imaging, medical laboratory technology, medical laboratory assistant and technician, and radiography. This investment is part of the government's broader strategy to expand access to high-quality healthcare right across our whole province. Increasing the number of trained professionals in fields such as medical radiation and imaging technology will help address current shortages, improve the overall capacity of the healthcare system, and make sure people in Ontario have better access to essential diagnostic and therapeutic services. I'll close by reiterating that our government's investments into medical education and new medical schools and expansions to nursing, paramedicine, PSW, and allied health professions, they all lead to one important outcome. More students will likely get the education they need to become highly skilled healthcare workers to build up Ontario's healthcare capacity.
Thank you, Minister.